Despite an estimated 2,000 languages being spoken across Africa, for many to succeed in the continent, they have no option but to learn English or French, the languages of the countries which colonize most of Africa. Now, experts are warning that this trend might lead to the extinction of indigenous languages. Renowned African writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o says abandoning one's indigenous language is tantamount to enslavement. Let's take a listen.
There's a difference between adding another language to what you already have, which I call empowerment, and what I call the other, where you add many languages. You remove your own language completely, and then you acquire other languages, which I call enslavement. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Mubarak Kenya, and a warm welcome to this edition of Africa Today, which is focusing on the dangers that African languages are facing amid rapid globalization, which has seen the dominance of English and French. Our experts will provide an incisive analysis and present possible solutions to this challenge facing African nations, which are fighting to preserve their identity. It will be great hearing from you as you watch our program, so keep in touch through our social media handle.
English, French imperil African languages. Africa has 55 countries that use a variety of languages, including some that are endangered due to several factors, especially the influence of Western culture. Every African language is a repository of history, culture, and values. So when a language dies, so too does history, culture, values, and the sense of identity. African language experts are waking up to the reality that a lack of school reading material in local languages is increasingly sounding the death knell for mother tongues.
With bilingual education, children are more active because they master the language. They are not afraid to speak to the teacher. They communicate better in a local language, a language they know well.
Experts and activists across Africa are now trying to restore the link between the people and their mother tongues. Now, for more analysis on this subject, we contacted Professor Kimani Njogu. He's a Kenyan linguist and a publisher who is also a member of the Kiswahili Cross-Border Language Commission at the African Academy of Languages, an organ of the African Union. Thank you very much, Professor.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
We also have Mr. Africa Kiza, a development anthropologist based in Kampala, Uganda. Thank you also for joining us today.
Most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now, Professor Kimani Njogu, first tell us, why is it important to maintain indigenous languages in Africa?
Well, you see, languages are carriers of culture. They are also carriers of knowledge, and they are carriers of histories. And this is not particular to African languages or indigenous languages. This refers to virtually all languages of the world. Therefore, when we preserve and develop indigenous African languages, we are, in a sense, appreciating and recognizing their place as carriers of African history, or the histories of the African people and their experiences, as well as their knowledge systems and their philosophies and their values and so forth and so on. So the development and the promotion of African languages is part of a whole system of appreciating knowledge production from the African continent.
Thank you for that, Professor Kimani Njogu.
Love for European languages in Africa comes from the colonial mentality that foreign languages are better than their local languages and are a guarantee for the future. Once young people go to higher education, they abandon their mother tongues thinking they are archaic and prefer to speak foreign languages such as French or English.
Now, Mr. Kiza, how has over-reliance on European languages while abandoning local languages affected development in Africa?
We have lost on this freedom of determining our own development path as Africa, because the current narrative and agenda of development is informed by the culture and language of the West. So it is important, if we are to develop as Africa from our own pace, and often as Africa we have been saying we wish to have Africa solutions to African problems. We cannot have this narrative. We cannot achieve this narrative of having African solutions to African problems when we keep relying on a language which is not ours.
Now, globalization and social media are also driving Africans away from their mother tongues. Many people are also no longer feeling proud to speak their mother tongues, as English and French and other European languages have replaced local languages in homes and schools in many parts of Africa. Now, a Zimbabwean language expert here speaks on the importance of the preservation of indigenous languages. Let's listen.
It's good to share information, exchange ideas, but at the end of the day, who are we? We need to know our identity. We need to actually build on what we know, build on what makes us, Zimbabweans.
Professor Kimani Njogu, now how serious is the threat faced by African languages from European languages, especially English and French?
They are in danger, really, of this suppression and domination by European languages, notwithstanding the fact that they are the ones, that is African languages, they are the ones that are spoken by over 70% or 80% of Africans across the continent. Therefore, the danger here is that the continued domination of indigenous languages or African languages by European languages undermines African histories, African philosophies, and the contribution of the continent to knowledge, global knowledge. And therefore, it's really a very serious issue here.
It's quite clear that European colonial languages have continued to dominate in education, commerce, the media, and interaction between African countries. While international languages are crucial for communication and academic transfer and engagement, the use of indigenous languages ensures that local populations are integrated in the development agenda. Is the use of English and French in most development documents in Africa discriminatory to those who do not understand or actually do not want to use these languages?
African countries are currently we are negotiating the African Continental Free Trade Area, an agreement that is going to unite to bring about an open market, a common market of free movement of goods and services within Africa. But there is actually fighting amongst the Francophone-speaking Africa and the French-speaking Africa and the English-speaking Africa countries because of the fact that which language takes precedence.
Local languages in Africa, just like in many parts of the world, are the basis for cultural identity and local development. African languages that survived the colonial era are now facing the danger of extinction amid an onslaught by European languages. During a visit to Burkina Faso in 2018, French President Emmanuel Macron unveiled his strategy to promote his native language, aiming to make it the first language in Africa.
Se renfermer sur telle ou telle langue, refuser la langue française ou avoir un effet de mode pour la langue anglaise dans le continent africain, c'est ne pas regarder l'avenir. Le français, ce sera la première langue de l'Afrique et peut-être du monde, si nous savons faire, dans les prochaines décennies. Prenons ce défi ensemble. Allons-y, portons-le.
Now let's go back to Professor Kimani Njogu. Do you think the gradual disregard of indigenous languages in Africa is a deliberate move by imperial powers to wipe out the identity of African people?
Well, let me say this, that the colonial project was always a project of domination and suppression of competing ideas. And therefore, under colonialism, the French deliberately suppressed African languages in their colonies, and the British did the same with regard to African languages, and the Portuguese did the same. Therefore, one could say that the colonial project was a project to deny the African people their identity and the base from which they could recollect their history. And even in situations where these languages were supported, they were not deliberately developed. And this has continued through the post-colonial period.
Now, speaking in 2019 during the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples, UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed spoke on the need to preserve, revitalize, and promote indigenous languages.
Almost half the world's estimated 6,700 languages are in danger of disappearing. Many of those belong to indigenous people. With every language that disappears, a world loses a wealth of traditional knowledge and cultural heritage. Education will have a pivotal role to play in ensuring that indigenous people can enjoy and preserve their culture and identity. Intercultural and multilingual education will be necessary to prevent the irreparable loss.
Now, Mr. Kiza, what are some of the urgent measures that need to be taken to ensure that future generations in Africa continue using local languages?
Yes, that's an interesting question. The first one and most critical is human capacity, human capital development. We need to invest in building the capacity of our human resource, of our development policymakers, of our negotiators, especially the young ones, of the development commentators, in ensuring that they speak our own languages. In investing resources in our own universities of higher learning, our own research institutions, to teach in African languages, to teach development from an African perspective and reality is another issue which I think is critical if African countries are to nurture and to bring back the African languages among the young generations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Africa Kiza, for your insight today. Now, we shall take a short break, so don't go away.
French imperil African languages.
In 2019, linguistic history was made after students at the University of Cape Town in South Africa graduated from an indigenous language course with roots that date back more than 200,000 years. The Khoisan are known to be one of the earliest inhabitants of Southern Africa, but their language was largely lost during the colonial period. A student who studied the language in university speaks on her accomplishment.
The course itself was an amazing journey to go on to learn this language that was used by my ancestors, by everyone's ancestors. Definitely made a change in my life, and it makes a change in everyone's life, just even to know a few words out of it.
Now, Professor Kimani Njogu, what sort of intervention is needed to uplift the indigenous languages in Africa?
No, I think the first place for immediate intervention is to look at the educational system and to ask the question, how can we build a continuity, a continuum between what the child experiences within the community in terms of language and what the child experiences within the educational system? How can we build a continuity in the two experiences?
Renowned African novelist from Kenya, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, didn't deliver his acceptance speech in English when last year he was honored as the 31st recipient of the Catalonia International Prize for his daring and distinguished literary work and defense of African languages. He has been writing in his native Kikuyu language since the 80s after abandoning English. Ngugi wrote a book titled Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature. He explains here on how he made the revolutionary decision to write in his mother tongue.
That I would no longer write my fiction or poetry in English anymore. I was going to write in an African language, and I was going to write in the only language then I knew quite well, which was Kikuyu. I had to do this. I had to find a way of connecting myself to myself, and I had to go against that whole colonial assumption, that people can only know themselves via England, in this case, or via European languages, or via Europe.
In July 2004, Kiswahili was declared the official language of the 55-member African Union, with the then chairperson Joachim Chissano delivering his entire speech during the AU summit in the language. Now, Professor Kimani Njogu, you earlier talked there about the Swahili or Kiswahili language. As we know, the African Union has adopted Swahili language as one of its official languages. Do you think this language can be used as the lingua franca in Africa?
Absolutely. I think that, first of all, we must commend the African Union for taking the position that Swahili or Kiswahili be adopted as one of its official languages, and therefore used at the African Union meetings, at the Pan-African Parliament, and other, fora across the continent. That action is very significant because it makes Kiswahili the only African language that plays that role at the African Union level. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that there is immense hope in the utility of Kiswahili as the lingua franca of the continent, or even just and without in fact suggesting that Kiswahili will undermine other languages. It will sit alongside other African languages, but it will play a very important role in encouraging inter-ethnic communication and international communication across the continent.
Thank you very much, Professor Kimani Njogu, for that insight.
Last year in South Africa, Swahili was approved as an optional language for the country's schools. South Africa was the first Southern African country to offer Swahili as an optional subject in schools, raising hopes for the growth of this language all across Africa. A South African teacher here elaborates on the importance of the adoption of Swahili language in her country.
We do welcome the introduction of Swahili because we believe that it is going to promote unity and will promote intercontinental trade and exchanges within the continent.
More African countries are starting to teach Swahili language. What is motivating these countries to teach this East African language?
Its acceptability level is very, very high because unlike many other languages, it's not ethnically bound in a strong way. So there is no strong ethnic identity associated with the Swahili language. And therefore, its acceptability is higher than, say, any of the other languages that we have, so that a Wolof speaker would be able to speak and learn Swahili without feeling that they are learning a very, very foreign language. In any case, it is situated on the continent. Its rhythm and spirit is the spirit and rhythm of the continent of Africa.
A glance at leading industrial countries across the world clearly shows that all school-going kids in these countries receive their elementary instruction in their first language. This includes countries in North America, Europe, and also Japan, China, South Korea, and Russia.
Now, a Nigerian teacher who has been teaching mathematics in a local language explains here on the advantages of using indigenous languages in a class.
One of the major popular research was done in the Yoruba land, where we had some students who were, for example, who were taught a subject using Yoruba language. So they had two groups of students. One group was taught a particular subject using Yoruba language, while another group was taught English language and then taught the subject in English. When the result was looked at the end of the day, the highest success rate was recorded from the students who were taught using the Yoruba language. And that's because we can never rule out the power the mother tongue has with regards to learning.
While some indigenous languages in Africa are threatened with extinction, but as we have seen, the tide is turning as more and more young people are learning the languages. Yet to remain relevant, these indigenous languages need to embrace technology.
Now, finally, my last question to you, Professor Kimani Njogu. Now, what needs to be done to make indigenous African languages appear cool and attractive to the tech-savvy generation?
And African languages are adaptive to really the changing environment. They are never static. They are responsive to the changes that we experience every day. So, for example, with the entry of mobile phones, African languages are at play in that technology, and they are utilized pretty well in really articulating the technologies. The other area of work really is to link the techies with language workers. Those of us who work with language every day ought to be able to work closely with innovators, with technologists, to be able to come up with terms that best serve, the needs of the techies.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kimani Njogu, a member of the Kiswahili Cross-Border Language Commission at the African Academy of Languages. Now, unfortunately, our time is up for today. It's an interesting topic, and for sure, we shall revisit this subject in future and maybe even speak in a common African language. And on that note, we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Today. I'm sure you enjoyed the show, so let's know what you think by dropping us a line through our social media handle. And thanks a lot for watching. And until our next episode, it's goodbye for now.